Believe it or not, but not every tool that you use to edit your photos these days is AI powered. In fact, most of the tools that you use have been around for years, well before AI was really even a thing. And because my last video covered my favorite AI powered tools in Lightroom, it's only fitting that I share my favorite non-AI tools as well. Now, truthfully, the reason why I'm creating these videos is not to pit one type of tool against another. Instead, I want to illustrate how it's the culmination and combination of all of these tools, AI and non-AI alike, that can be used to achieve amazing results. It doesn't have to be a scenario where it's this or that, but at the end of the day, my goal is to help you understand how these tools work and what their potential is so that you can make a more informed decision as to whether they fit within your workflow. So with that, let's dive in. All right, so for my first favorite non-AI tool, it's pretty simple. I've used it forever, and it is the auto button. So when you click on auto, you'll see that Lightroom will attempt to make adjustments to the sliders in the light section as well as the color section of the edit stack. In some cases, what auto will attempt to do is kind of bring tone in bounds. So you can see here, even with auto, we're still clipping some of the shadows over here, but it did restore the blown out highlights. Watch, if I undo, you can see that there was a little bit of a blown out highlight, but clicking auto dropped some of those highlights here. It dropped the whites. It also opened up the shadows, but it dropped the black. So those are the things that auto does. Now, the reason why I have auto here is because this is what I've used for years, but I think it was last year, if I remember correctly, we introduced what I would consider to be a newer version of auto. It is AI powered, which is why I'm not using it here, but that is the adaptive color and adaptive black and white profiles. So with these, generally, you're going to use one or the other. You're either going to apply an adaptive color profile, which is a bit more of an intelligent auto, because what adaptive does is it looks at the image and it'll apply edits to specific regions. Whereas with auto, it just applies these global edits here, and it makes material changes to your sliders. Watch, if I undo this and I apply adaptive color, notice how the image is edited, but the sliders are untouched because it's a profile. Now, here's an important point. If you click on auto and you were to attempt to apply adaptive color, you will get a warning dialog saying, hey, probably want to use one or the other. You don't want to use both. So that's why I don't apply both. But the reason why auto is so important is because it does a good job of kind of getting me to a good starting point. So if you were to look at this image here, if I were to undo this again, you can see that the foreground is really underexposed. I was exposing more for the sunset sky here. And when I click auto, this is actually looking good. Like, you don't necessarily want to open things up that much because this foreground was actually quite dark. Like, that's just the way it was. So, you know, it gets me here to a good point. Yes, I could go ahead and press the Option or Alt key while drag on blacks here to get this mask view, and I can kind of recover some of the blacks, but I'm okay with not necessarily recovering all blacks here. It's okay to have a little bit of clipped shadows because there are some very dark areas of the photo. But again, because I'm able to click one button, auto over here, which is non-AI powered, it gets me to a good place. Oftentimes you'll see that vibrance and saturation will be adjusted, and sometimes I do think that vibrance is a bit strong. Like, usually I do see it around plus 15, so I'm going to dial this back, and then I'll just reset saturation to 0. So of course, what auto does is just a suggestion. You can fine tune all of these as you see fit. Like in this case, I'm going to bring the whites back up a bit. I'm going to open the highlights up a bit, but not too much, somewhere right around there. Now, you might be wondering truly, like, what's the difference between auto and the adaptive color profile that I just showed? Well, this actually leads me to my second favorite non-AI tool. And it's not an edit tool per se, but it's over here under versions. I think versions is one of the most underrated and powerful tools in Lightroom next to the masking panel, because it allows you to quickly create kind of saved states of your photos. I use versions all the time. Usually when I want to make an SDR edit and an HDR edit to my photo, I'll create an SDR version and an HDR version. That way I can kind of switch between them. And the best thing about versions, at least with the Lightroom ecosystem, is that they sync between Lightroom desktop, mobile, and web. So I have them accessible wherever I am, and I can save versions on all of those other devices. Now, Versions is not a mechanism that Lightroom Classic has, but you do have the ability to create snapshots, which is kind of similar. So it kind of creates a saved state that you can rename. So you do have that there, and it's the same kind of ethos where you kind of have your image at a specific place and you just want to save that snapshot. You've got that in Lightroom Classic as well. So again, versions is my second favorite on the list here. I'm going to create a new named version, and I'll call this Auto. And then I'm going to click on Create. There you go. There's my saved version. And then if I go to Original here, so I'm going to reset the image and go back here. And now I'm going to apply the adaptive color profile. So this has been applied. I'm going to go back to versions, and I'm going to create a new version here, and I'm going to call this adaptive color. And now if I hover over these versions, here's adaptive color, and then go to auto and then go back, you can see the difference between them. They're pretty subtle. You can see that the sky has a different type of edit. So there's the foreground compared to auto. So it's totally up to you, but I just want to illustrate how I think when adaptive color came out, people were flocking to it. But don't forget auto, like don't sleep on it. In some cases, I personally have found that auto has provided much better results than adaptive color, because sometimes the mask, for example, here that the adaptive color profile applies for the sky is not especially good. I don't like it. So that's why in some cases, I'll always at least see what the difference is between these two. And so again, because I have my version here for auto, all I need to do is click on it. And then when I go to the edit stack, you'll see we are back at the exact state that we were in when I created that named version. All right, let's go ahead. I'm going to actually open the exposure up a bit. I'm also going to open the shadows up just a bit and move the blacks up just a bit. So right around here. And then I'm also going to zero out contrast. And the reason why I zero out contrast is because of my third favorite non-AI tool. And I guess it's also important to note that this is not in any kind of order of priority. I'm just kind of going through the edit stack and I'm walking you through them. But just because, for example, point curve, which is number 3, is in the 3 spot, doesn't mean that it's like my third favorite. So with that, the point curve is one of the most important editing tools, in my opinion, because it gives you granular control over how you manipulate the luminance in your image, like the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights, as well as these various different color channels, red, green, and blue. And so what I mean by manipulating the luminance values here is this allows me to get a much more refined contrast, or apply a more refined contrast to the image, rather than using the contrast slider, which is kind of like a predefined algorithm. So here, I've talked about my use of the point curve many times in a lot of my videos, but effectively what I usually do is I drop 3 dots. I drop one here, and one here, and then I apply an S-curve. And so what an S-curve effectively is I take this dot here, which is the shadows region of the image, I drag it down. You can see how the shadow area of the image is getting darker. Then I'll take this dot here, which is the highlights. I'll bring it up, but not much, because you can see, like, look over here in the sky area, and I'm going to drop it. If I go up, you can see how those highlights get really, really quickly blown out, and I don't want that. I kind of want it right around there. And then with the midtones. So with the midtones, if I go up, you can see how the midtones are getting brighter. If I go down, they get really kind of punchy. And so you want to be careful. I'm going to get it right around there. Right around here looks good. But the reason why I also love working with the point curve is that I can also introduce more subtlety in the darkest and the brightest areas by taking either this point or this point and moving it up or down. So if I take this point, which represents the black point, and I drag it up, it will start introducing gray and then ultimately white into the darkest parts of the image, which you can see here. This actually looks kind of funky. I don't want that. However, if I introduce just a little bit of gray, you get that kind of faded look. And because we're introducing this kind of dirty gray into the shadows, so I think it looks great. Same thing with the white point here. So if I take the white point and I bring it down, we start introducing black into the brightest parts of the image. So it's the inverse. And so here, usually I'll drop this down just a bit. And if you look over here in the sunset area, you can see how that bright highlight starts to get a little softer, because what we're doing is we're introducing gray In the same way that we introduce gray into the darkest areas, we're introducing kind of gray into the brightest areas. And so it kind of softens things up. And you can see if I toggle the mute icon right here, this is the image without the tone curve applied. And then this is what we were able to get just with the tone curve. So you can see what a huge impact it has on the photo. Now, there are also these red, green, and blue color channels. And these are also very powerful. Like, for example, if I go to blue here, you'll see that we have two complementary colors. What this means is, let's say I want to introduce a little bit of orange to the highlight areas of the image. Well, I can drop a dot here, and if I drag it down, do you see how the entire image is getting this orange applied to the highlights? Now, this is way too strong, but you can imagine with just a little kick, what a beautiful job it does to kind of accentuate orange in the brightest parts of the image. Now, I can use kind of color theory best practices by bringing a little bit of blue back into the shadows. This is a form, I guess you can call it, of color grading or split toning. This is a bit too much, so I'm going to drag it down a bit. So somewhere here. And again, if we toggle, I mean, it really has a huge impact on the image. All right, let's move on to my fourth favorite non-AI tool. And actually, it is a subpanel that's hidden by default in Lightroom and is found at the very bottom of the Develop module in Lightroom Classic, and that is color calibration. In Classic, it's just called Calibration, if I remember correctly. And in the Lightroom here, if you don't see it, all you need to do is click on this try dot and then go down here and select Show Color Calibration, and then that will make this panel visible. And specifically, what I like is using this blue primary saturation slider. Now, you might be wondering, well, all right, I've got this blue primary saturation slider, but I also know that I have over here in Color Mixer, this blue here, so I can take this blue, and I've got a saturation slider. So let me show you the difference. If I move the saturation slider of blue, look at the image here, and watch. I'm going to increase the saturation and decrease it. What do you see? To me, I see only the blue in the images having the saturation affected. You can see how the oranges and the other colors in the photo are untouched. Now, let's go back to color calibration. Again, blue primary saturation, and let's adjust this slider here. Now, what do you see? Look at the oranges, look at the yellows, and look at the blues. Do you see how all of the colors here have the saturation affected? The key difference is with Color Mixer, this saturation slider is only affecting the pixels that are blue. It's not touching any of the pixels that have a different color value. Whereas with the color calibration section, it is affecting the blue in every single pixel. So every pixel is made up of red, green, and blue, and adjusting these sliders will adjust those color values in every pixel throughout the photo. So what does this mean? Well, basically, in a very, very, very lay term, by increasing the blue primary saturation slider, I get this really pleasing color boost to the image. In my opinion, it's far more pleasing than using the color mixer. And you can use combinations of all of these sliders, so I can increase the red primary as well. Now, it might not show through as much, but I can see here, like especially in the sky, it just has this beautiful color pop. All right, so for my fifth, and I guess we'll keep it final, non-AI tool in Lightroom, this is something that I apply to every single photo, probably you do too, because it's critical, and that is sharpening. So sharpening is found over here under the detail section, and it's something that's so critical that Lightroom applies a default amount as soon as you import raw files. But sharpening requires a bit of understanding here because by default, at least in Lightroom, you might just have this one slider. I highly recommend you always expand this so you can see all four of the tools that sharpening has. The long and the short of it is the way that I use sharpening is first, I'm going to zoom into 100% and I'm going to pan to an area that should have a lot of detail. So something like this. And then with the amount slider, which is this sharpening slider, I press and hold on the Option key on Mac or Alt on Windows. And when I start dragging, the image turns grayscale. And this just makes it easier to see the effect of the sharpening. So you see as I go back and forth, you can see more of the detail appear along these edges. And sharpening basically is just a form of contrast that's being applied to these edges. and you don't want to have too much of it because then it gets over sharpened. So right around here looks good. And one important point to make is from image to image, that amount slider varies. So I don't generally have a fixed amount. I will zoom in to an area that should have detail, and then I'll use the grayscale view to kind of dial in the amount. However, there are other sliders that I generally do have a fixed value for, and that is the radius slider and the detail slider. So the radius slider is a pixel value. So that 1 is basically 1 pixel, and what it's saying is, let's apply sharpening 1 pixel on either side of every high contrast edge. Now, generally, I find that to be sometimes too much, which is why, for the most part, I always keep the radius slider all the way to the left at half a pixel. That reduces how far sharpening is applied. The next is the detail slider, which controls basically the size of the high contrast edges where sharpening is applied. If I take the detail slider and I bring it to the left, it's going to only apply sharpening to the largest edges. So like these large flat edges. However, I don't want that. I want sharpening applied to all of the fine high contrast edges, which is why generally I take detail and I bring it to 100. So sharpening is variable, masking is variable, but radius goes to the left and detail goes to the right. I have found this formula to be very consistent. And so let's look at masking, which is the 4th slider for sharpening. Masking controls where sharpening is applied. You do not need sharpening in the sky over here, right? Like this has no high contrast edge. It's just kind of like a flat area. But sharpening is currently being applied globally because the masking slider is set to 0. Now, I could just take this masking slider and increase it, but I mean, there's no way to know the effect. It's just very hard, which is why it's super important to press and hold on the Option or Alt key while dragging on masking. And so when I do that, we get a mask view. And effectively, anything that turns black will have sharpening removed. So notice how the entire sky is now black, with the exception of the edges of the clouds. And so generally, the way that I like to explain this slider is I adjust it until the image looks like kind of like a pencil sketch. So something like this. Here, I'm seeing that all of the edges here have sharpening applied, which is exactly what I want. And so when I let go, I now know that the sharpening tools here are tuned for this image. And so you can see if I hit the backslash key, this was our original unedited photo. And then again, with just a few non-AI powered tools, we were able to achieve a really great result. Now, of course, there are plenty of non-AI powered tools in Lightroom. I would argue that most of them are non-AI powered. And the reason why I made this list is because these just happen to be the specific edit stack tools that I use all the time, pretty much on every photo, which is why they made it to my favorites list. Also, of course, versions, that is not an AI powered tool, but I use it non-stop. Pretty much every time I finish an edit, I create a named version just so I have a record of it in case I want to quickly reset the edits. I know that I don't have to worry about losing whatever edits I applied initially. Now, of course, there are tons of tools that are edit and non-edit based with Lightroom. And if you want to learn them all, then please check out my course called Lightroom Everywhere. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. Now, I also mentioned how I have a video of my favorite AI-powered tools in Lightroom. I've got that here, or you could see what YouTube might think you might like over here. As always, a thumbs up is greatly appreciated, as is clicking on the subscribe button and the bell icon to get notified of all future videos. Thanks a lot, everyone.